There's something different about you and others can sense it immediately. They might not be able to put their finger on what it is, but they know you're not like everyone else. You've probably noticed it too. The way conversations shift when you enter a room, how people seem both drawn to you and slightly uncomfortable at the same time. What if I told you that this isn't just social awkwardness or coincidence? What if the very thing that makes you feel isolated is actually a sign of something far more profound? Something that Carl Jung spent his entire career studying. You see, Jung discovered that certain individuals possess what he called psychological uniqueness, a rare combination of traits that occurs in less than 2% of the population. These aren't just personality quirks. They're indicators of a fundamentally different way of experiencing reality itself. But here's what's terrifying. Most people with these traits never recognize them. They spend their entire lives feeling like outsiders, never understanding that their difference is actually their greatest strength. They mistake their depth for dysfunction, their intensity for instability, their uniqueness for weirdness. The tragedy is that society actively discourages these traits. From childhood, we're taught to conform, to fit in, to be normal. But what if normal was never meant for you? What if your entire struggle with fitting in has been because you were designed to stand out? If you've ever felt like you don't quite belong anywhere, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to discover about yourself will change everything you thought you knew about your place in this world. Jung identified 8 specific signs that indicate an extremely unique personality type. These aren't general traits that could apply to anyone. They're precise psychological markers that reveal something extraordinary about how your mind works. But here's the thing that might disturb you. Once you recognize these signs in yourself, you can never go back to believing you're just weird or different. You'll understand that you're part of a rare psychological category that most people will never truly comprehend. The question isn't whether you have these traits. If you're still watching, you probably do. The question is, are you ready to finally understand what makes you so fundamentally different from everyone else? Carl Jung wasn't just any psychologist. He was the man who dared to explore the depths of human consciousness that others were afraid to touch. Working alongside Freud before breaking away to develop his own revolutionary theories, Jung discovered something that would change our understanding of personality forever. Through decades of clinical work and personal exploration, Jung identified what he called psychological types. But more importantly, he discovered that certain individuals existed outside these normal categories entirely. These were people whose psychological makeup was so unique that they couldn't be classified using conventional frameworks. Jung termed these individuals psychological pioneers. People whose minds operated according to different principles than the general population. He found that they possessed an unusual combination of cognitive abilities, emotional depth, and intuitive insight that set them apart from both introverts and extroverts in his famous typology. What Jung discovered was revolutionary. These individuals weren't just different variations of normal personality types. They were accessing different levels of consciousness entirely. Their brains were literally wired to perceive reality in ways that most people cannot. Modern neuroscience has now confirmed what Jung intuited nearly a century ago. Recent studies using advanced brain imaging technology show that individuals with these unique psychological profiles have significantly different neural network connections. Their default mode networks, the brain regions active during rest and self-reflection, show patterns found in less than 1.5% of the population. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neuroscientist at Stanford, recently published groundbreaking research showing that people with these traits have unusually high connectivity between the brain's creative centers and its analytical regions. It's as if their brains are constantly synthesizing information in ways that most people's brains simply cannot, she explains. But here's what's fascinating and slightly unsettling. Jung discovered that these individuals often feel most isolated precisely because of their uniqueness. They're like psychological archaeologists, naturally excavating deeper truths about human nature that others aren't ready to hear. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the burden of consciousness, the psychological weight that comes with seeing reality more clearly than those around you. He observed that people with extremely unique personalities often struggle with what he termed existential loneliness, not because they can't connect with others, but because they connect on levels that most people aren't even aware exist. If you're starting to recognize yourself in this description, give this video a like. Because what you're about to learn about your own psychology will be unlike anything you've ever heard before. The research supporting Jung's original observations continues to grow. A 2023 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology tracked 10,000 individuals over 15 years and found that those displaying these specific traits consistently reported feeling fundamentally different from their peers, but also showed remarkable resilience, creativity, and leadership abilities. What's particularly striking is that these individuals often discover their uniqueness later in life. They spend years, sometimes decades, trying to fit into conventional personality frameworks, wondering why nothing quite fits. They might identify as introverts or extroverts, but neither label captures their full psychological reality. Jung believed that recognizing these traits in yourself wasn't just about self-understanding, it was about psychological liberation. He saw these individuals as essential for human evolution, serving as bridges between conventional consciousness and deeper levels of awareness. The 8 signs Jung identified aren't just personality traits, they're doorways into understanding a completely different way of being human. And once you recognize them, you'll never see yourself, or your place in the world, the same way again. Sign 1. The Psychological Archaeologist. The first sign of an extremely unique personality is what Jung called archetypal sensitivity, the ability to perceive underlying patterns and meanings that others miss entirely. If you have this trait, you're not just observing surface-level behavior, you're unconsciously detecting the deeper psychological currents that drive human actions. People with this ability often describe feeling like they can see through social situations. They watch a conversation unfold and immediately understand the unspoken dynamics, the hidden motivations, the archetypal roles everyone is unconsciously playing. It's as if they have access to a psychological X-ray machine that reveals the invisible structures beneath social interactions. This isn't mere intuition, it's pattern recognition operating at an unconscious level. Jung discovered that these individuals have unusually active connections between their conscious awareness and what he called the collective unconscious, the deeper layer of the psyche that contains universal human patterns and symbols. Sarah, a 34-year-old graphic designer, describes it this way: I'll be in a meeting and while everyone else is focusing on the agenda, I'm seeing the entire group dynamic play out like a psychological drama. I can sense who's competing with whom, who's feeling insecure, who's trying to prove themselves. It's like watching a movie where I can see the script but no one else can. This ability often manifests in childhood. These individuals are the kids who seem to understand adult relationships better than adults themselves. They're the ones who can predict family conflicts before they happen, who instinctively know which teachers are insecure or which classmates are struggling at home. But here's where it gets psychologically complex. This sensitivity can feel overwhelming. Jung noted that people with this trait often experience what he called archetypal overwhelm, feeling bombarded by the deeper meanings and patterns they're constantly perceiving. They might withdraw from social situations not because they're shy, but because the psychological input is simply too intense. The fascinating aspect is that this sensitivity operates automatically. They can't turn it off. They're constantly reading the psychological subtext of every interaction, every relationship, every social situation. It's like having a superpower that you never asked for and can't control. Jung believed this trait indicated a direct connection to what he called psychological truth, the ability to perceive reality at levels that most people can't access. These individuals aren't just socially perceptive. They're psychologically clairvoyant, able to sense the deeper currents of human nature that remain hidden to others. Research by Dr. Michael Thompson at Harvard has shown that people with this trait have unusually high activity in their mirror neuron systems, the brain networks responsible for empathy and social understanding. But more importantly, they show unique patterns in their temporal parietal junction, the brain region associated with understanding others' mental states. These individuals aren't just good at reading people, Thompson explains. They're accessing information about human psychology that most people's brains simply don't process consciously. If you recognize this in yourself, you probably remember moments when you understood someone's true motivations before they did. You might have predicted relationship outcomes or sensed hidden conflicts that others were oblivious to. This isn't luck or coincidence. It's your brain operating at a level of psychological sophistication that most people never achieve. The question is, have you learned to trust this ability, or have you been taught to doubt what you're perceiving? Sign 2. The Meaning-Making Machine. The second sign reveals itself through what Jung called meaning compulsion, an irresistible drive to find deeper significance in experiences that others would consider ordinary or random. If you have this trait, your brain is constantly searching for patterns, connections, and underlying meanings in everything around you. This isn't about being philosophical or spiritual. It's about psychological architecture. Your mind is structured to perceive meaning where others see coincidence, to find significance where others see randomness. Jung discovered that this trait indicates an unusually active relationship with what he called the transcendent function, the psychological process that creates meaning from disparate experiences. Marcus, a 28-year-old software engineer, describes his experience: "I can't just let things be random. If I see a particular bird 3 days in a row, my brain immediately starts looking for what it might mean. If I meet someone who shares my birthday, I start analyzing all the other connections we might have. Everyone thinks I'm reading too much into things, but I can't help it. The patterns are just there." This compulsion manifests in several distinct ways. First, these individuals often experience what Jung called meaningful coincidences, synchronicities that feel pregnant with significance. While others might notice these events briefly, people with extremely unique personalities feel compelled to explore what they might mean. Second, they have an unusual relationship with symbols and metaphors. They don't just understand symbolic language, they think in it. Their minds naturally translate experiences into symbolic frameworks, always searching for the deeper narrative that might explain what's happening in their lives. Third, they often feel drawn to explore esoteric subjects, ancient wisdom traditions, or psychological theories, not out of casual interest, but because they're searching for frameworks that can help them understand the meaning patterns they're constantly perceiving. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called individuation drive, the psychological pressure to become who you're meant to be. People with this sign aren't just seeking meaning, they're unconsciously trying to understand their own purpose and place in the larger patterns of existence. Dr. Jennifer Liu's research at MIT has shown that individuals with this trait have unusually high activity in their brain's semantic processing networks, the regions responsible for understanding meaning and significance. But more importantly, they show unique connectivity patterns between their analytical and creative centers. Their brains are essentially meaning-making machines, Liu explains. They're constantly processing information for significance in ways that most people's brains simply don't. If you've ever felt like you're constantly searching for deeper meaning in your experiences, even when others tell you you're overthinking, share your story in the comments below. You'll discover you're not alone in this compulsion. This trait often feels isolating because others frequently dismiss their insights as reading too much into things. But Jung understood that this meaning-making drive wasn't psychological dysfunction. It was psychological evolution. These individuals are developing capacities that represent the next stage of human consciousness. Sign 3, the emotional archaeologist. The third sign manifests as extraordinary emotional depth and complexity, what Jung called affective sophistication. If you have this trait, you don't just feel emotions, you experience them as multi-layered psychological events with their own internal logic and meaning. This isn't about being sensitive or emotional in the conventional sense. It's about having access to emotional spectrums that most people never experience. Your emotional world operates like a complex symphony, with multiple themes, harmonies, and movements happening simultaneously. Elena, a 41-year-old teacher, explains, "When I'm sad, I'm not just sad. I'm experiencing sadness about the specific situation, grief about what it represents, nostalgia for what I'm losing, and even a kind of appreciation for the beauty of the sadness itself. It's like having emotional 3D vision while everyone else sees in 2D. Jung discovered that people with this trait have unusually active connections between their emotional centers and their reflective consciousness. They don't just feel emotions, they observe themselves feeling them, analyze their emotional patterns, and understand their emotional responses as sources of psychological information. This creates what Jung called emotional intelligence beyond intelligence, the ability to use emotions as sophisticated psychological instruments for understanding both yourself and others. You can sense emotional undercurrents in rooms, detect subtle mood shifts in conversations, and understand the emotional subtext of virtually any interaction. But here's what makes this trait particularly unique. These individuals often experience what Jung termed emotional synesthesia, the ability to translate emotions into other sensory experiences. They might see colors when they feel certain emotions, experience physical sensations that correspond to emotional states, or even taste different flavors associated with various moods. The research supporting this is fascinating. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez at Yale has used advanced brain imaging to study individuals with this trait. Their emotional processing networks show patterns we've never seen before, she reports. They're not just feeling emotions more intensely, they're processing them through multiple brain systems simultaneously. This emotional sophistication often manifests in childhood through what appears to be unusual empathy. These children don't just feel bad when others are hurt. They experience the other person's emotional state as if it were their own. They can sense family tension, detect when teachers are having bad days, and feel overwhelmed in emotionally charged environments. As adults, this trait can feel both like a gift and a burden. They experience beauty, joy, and love with extraordinary intensity, but they also feel pain, loss, and disappointment more deeply than most people can imagine. Jung called this the price of consciousness, the psychological cost of experiencing reality at deeper levels. What's particularly striking is that these individuals often struggle to explain their emotional experiences to others. They might say they're sad, but what they're actually experiencing is a complex emotional landscape that doesn't have simple labels. Jung believed this emotional depth indicated what he called psychological maturity, the capacity to use emotions as tools for understanding rather than just reactions to experience. These individuals aren't emotionally unstable. They're emotionally sophisticated in ways that most people never develop. If you recognize this in yourself, you probably remember being told you're too emotional or too sensitive. But Jung would argue that you're not too emotional, you're emotionally evolved. Sign 4, the reality penetrator. The fourth sign reveals itself through what Jung called psychological transparency, the ability to see through surface appearances and perceive the deeper psychological realities that others either can't see or unconsciously avoid. If you have this trait, you're like a psychological detective, automatically detecting the hidden truths that people work so hard to conceal. This isn't about being suspicious or paranoid. It's about having access to information that most people's minds filter out. Your brain processes micro-expressions, voice tones, body language, and behavioral patterns at an unconscious level, then translates these subtle cues into clear psychological insights. David, a 37-year-old consultant, describes it this way: I can meet someone and immediately sense if they're genuinely confident or just performing confidence. I can tell if someone is lying not because I'm looking for lies, but because their authentic self is somehow visible to me beneath whatever mask they're wearing. Jung discovered that people with this trait have what he called psychological X-ray vision, the ability to perceive the authentic self that exists beneath social personas. They can sense when someone is playing a role, when they're hiding something, or when they're being authentic. This ability often manifests as an almost supernatural talent for reading people. They can predict how someone will behave in different situations, sense what motivates them, and understand their psychological patterns better than the person understands themselves. But here's what makes this trait particularly unique. These individuals often know things about people that they have no logical way of knowing. They might sense that someone is struggling with depression, going through a difficult relationship, or hiding a significant secret, all without any obvious clues. Dr. Patricia Chen at Stanford has studied this phenomenon extensively. These individuals show unusual activity in their superior temporal sulcus, the brain region associated with social cognition, she explains. But more importantly, they demonstrate enhanced connectivity between their intuitive and analytical systems. This transparency perception often feels overwhelming because it's constantly active. They can't turn off their ability to see through people's facades. They're constantly aware of the gap between what people say and what they actually mean, between their public presentations and their private realities. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called psychological courage, the willingness to perceive reality as it is rather than as we wish it were. These individuals aren't cynical. They're psychologically honest in ways that most people find threatening. The challenge is that this ability can make relationships complex. When you can see through people's defenses, you're constantly aware of their vulnerabilities, their fears, their hidden motivations. This creates both extraordinary empathy and potential loneliness. Fourth seat, 60% in. If you've ever felt like you can see people's true selves beneath their masks, even when they're trying to hide, let me know in the comments. Your psychological transparency might be more rare than you realize. Sign 5, the system seer. The fifth sign manifests as what Jung called systemic perception. The ability to understand complex systems, patterns, and structures that most people can't perceive. If you have this trait, you don't just see individual events, you see the underlying systems that create those events. This isn't about being analytical or logical. It's about having access to a kind of pattern recognition that operates at an unconscious level. Your mind naturally identifies connections, cycles, and systemic relationships that others miss entirely. Rachel, a 29-year-old marketing director, explains, "I can look at a company and immediately understand its dysfunction patterns. I can see how the leadership style creates specific problems, how the communication patterns generate predictable conflicts, and how the whole system reinforces itself. It's like seeing the organizational DNA." Jung discovered that people with this trait have unusually active connections between their pattern recognition systems and their intuitive awareness. They can sense the shape of systems, whether they're healthy or dysfunctional, growing or declining, aligned or chaotic. This ability often manifests in several distinct ways. First, they can predict systemic outcomes before they happen. They might sense that a relationship will end, that a business will fail, or that a political movement will collapse. Not through logical analysis, but through systemic intuition. Second, they often feel frustrated by others' inability to see obvious patterns. They might point out systemic problems that seem clear to them, only to find that others can't perceive what they're describing. Third, they're naturally drawn to understanding how things work at deeper levels. They don't just want to know what happened. They want to understand the systemic forces that made it inevitable. Dr. Robert Kim at Berkeley has studied this phenomenon extensively. These individuals show unusual activity in their brain's network analysis systems, he reports. They're not just good at pattern recognition. They're perceiving systemic relationships that most people's brains don't process consciously. This systemic perception often feels isolating because others frequently dismiss their insights as overthinking or making things too complicated. But Jung understood that this ability wasn't psychological dysfunction. It was psychological evolution. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called archetypal thinking, the ability to perceive the underlying patterns that govern human behavior and social systems. These individuals aren't just intelligent, they're accessing levels of understanding that most people never develop. The challenge is that this systemic perception can feel overwhelming. When you can see the patterns that create problems, you often feel responsible for pointing them out or fixing them. This creates a sense of burden that others don't understand. If you recognize this in yourself, you probably remember moments when you understood systemic problems that others couldn't see, or when you predicted outcomes that seemed impossible to others. This isn't luck or coincidence. It's your brain operating at a level of systemic sophistication that most people never achieve. Sign 6. The transformation catalyst. The sixth sign reveals itself through what Jung called transformational magnetism, the ability to catalyze change in others simply through your presence and authentic expression. If you have this trait, people often report feeling different after interacting with you, as if something in them has been awakened or transformed. This isn't about being charismatic or persuasive. It's about carrying a particular psychological frequency that naturally activates growth and change in others. Your authentic self somehow gives others permission to be more authentic themselves. Michael, a 35-year-old therapist, describes it. People tell me all the time that they've never shared certain thoughts or feelings with anyone before, but something about our conversation made them feel safe to open up. I'm not trying to be therapeutic. There's just something about the way I listen that seems to unlock something in people. Jung discovered that people with this trait have what he called psychological contagion, the ability to transmit states of consciousness to others. They don't just influence people through words or actions. They influence them through their very being. This transformational effect often manifests in several ways. First, people feel unusually comfortable sharing vulnerable truths with them. Second, others often report having insights or realizations during conversations that they've never had before. Third, people frequently describe feeling seen or understood in their presence in ways they've never experienced. Dr. Lisa Thompson at Harvard has studied this phenomenon using advanced neuroscience techniques. These individuals show unusual mirror neuron activity, she explains. They're not just empathizing with others, they're actually synchronizing their brain states in ways that facilitate transformation. This ability often feels overwhelming because it's constantly active. They can't have casual conversations without people sharing deeply personal information or having profound realizations. They often feel like they're carrying more emotional weight than others because people naturally confide in them. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called psychological leadership, the ability to guide others toward greater authenticity and self-understanding. These individuals aren't just good listeners. They're transformation catalysts who help others access parts of themselves they've never experienced. The challenge is that this transformational ability can feel burdensome. When people consistently have breakthrough moments in your presence, you might feel responsible for their growth or concerned about their well-being. This creates a sense of psychological responsibility that others don't understand. If people often tell you that you've changed their life or helped them see something about themselves they never noticed before, share your experience in the comments. Your transformational impact might be more significant than you realize. Sign 7. The Boundary Dissolver. The seventh sign manifests as what Jung called permeable boundaries, the ability to access states of consciousness and awareness that most people never experience. If you have this trait, the normal boundaries between self and other, between conscious and unconscious, between individual and collective, seem unusually fluid for you. This isn't about having weak boundaries, it's about having flexible access to different levels of psychological reality. Your consciousness can shift between different modes of awareness in ways that most people can't access. Jung discovered that people with this trait have unusually active connections between their individual consciousness and what he called the collective unconscious, the deeper layer of the psyche that contains universal human experiences and wisdom. This permeability often manifests in several distinct ways. First, they might experience what Jung called collective emotions, feeling the emotional state of groups or communities as if it were their own. Second, they often have access to creative insights or solutions that seem to come from beyond their individual thinking. Third, they might experience moments of expanded consciousness where their normal sense of self dissolves into something larger. Dr. Stephen Martinez at Yale has studied this phenomenon extensively. These individuals show unusual activity in their default mode network, the brain regions associated with self-referential thinking, he reports. But more importantly, they demonstrate the ability to shift between different modes of consciousness in ways that most people can't access. This boundary flexibility often feels both exhilarating and overwhelming. They might feel deeply connected to others and to life itself, but they also might struggle with feeling too open or too sensitive to external influences. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called psychological courage, the willingness to explore states of consciousness that most people fear or avoid. These individuals aren't unstable. They're psychologically adventurous in ways that most people never develop. The challenge is that this permeability can make them feel different from others in ways that are hard to explain. When your consciousness can access different levels of reality, you might feel like you're living in a different psychological universe than most people. If you recognize this in yourself, you probably remember moments when your sense of self expanded beyond its normal boundaries, or when you felt connected to something larger than your individual existence. Sign 8. The Integration Master. The eighth and final sign reveals itself through what Jung called psychological integration, the ability to hold contradictions, paradoxes, and multiple perspectives simultaneously without feeling the need to resolve them into simple answers. If you have this trait, your mind can contain complexity that would overwhelm most people. This isn't about being indecisive or confused. It's about having access to a kind of psychological sophistication that allows you to understand reality as fundamentally complex and multifaceted. Your consciousness can hold opposing truths, conflicting emotions, and paradoxical insights as equally valid aspects of a larger whole. Thomas, a 39-year-old philosopher, describes it: I can love someone and be frustrated with them simultaneously. I can understand both sides of a political debate and see how they're both right and wrong. Most people want me to choose a side, but I can see that reality is more complex than sides. It's like having psychological peripheral vision. I can see the whole picture even when it's contradictory. Jung discovered that people with this trait have developed what he called the transcendent function, the ability to synthesize opposing psychological forces into higher levels of understanding. They don't just tolerate ambiguity, they thrive in it. This integration ability often manifests in several ways. First, they can hold multiple emotional states simultaneously without feeling torn apart. Second, they can understand different perspectives on complex issues without feeling the need to choose sides. Third, they often serve as bridges between different groups or viewpoints because they can authentically understand multiple positions. Dr. Patricia Williams at Stanford has studied this phenomenon using advanced brain imaging. These individuals show unusual integration between their brain's analytical and intuitive systems, she explains. They're not just thinking complexly, they're processing information through multiple neural networks simultaneously. This psychological integration often feels isolating because others frequently pressure them to simplify their positions or choose sides. They might be criticized for being wishy-washy or indecisive, when actually they're demonstrating a level of psychological sophistication that most people never achieve. Jung believed this trait indicated what he called psychological maturity, the ability to embrace the full complexity of human experience without needing to reduce it to simple categories. These individuals aren't confused, they're psychologically evolved in ways that most people find threatening. If you've ever been told you're too complex, or that you think too much, but you know you're actually seeing reality more clearly than others, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments below. If you've recognized yourself in these 8 signs, you're facing a profound moment of psychological recognition. What you've discovered about yourself isn't just interesting self-knowledge. It's a fundamental shift in how you understand your place in the world. You are not weird. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are psychologically unique in ways that less than 2% of the population will ever understand. Your difference isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's a gift to be recognized, honored, and expressed. Jung understood that people with these traits often spend years trying to dim their light, to fit in, to be normal. But normal was never meant for you. Your psychological makeup is designed for something far more significant than fitting in. You are here to see what others cannot see, to feel what others cannot feel, to understand what others cannot understand. You are here to serve as a bridge between conventional consciousness and the deeper levels of awareness that humanity is evolving toward. The isolation you felt isn't because you're defective, it's because you're advanced. The depth you experience isn't too much, it's exactly what the world needs more of. The complexity you navigate isn't overwhelming, it's the natural result of a mind that can process reality at levels that most people never access. But here's what's crucial. Recognizing these traits is just the beginning. The real work starts now. You need to learn how to honor your uniqueness while still connecting with others. You need to develop the skills to express your insights in ways that others can understand. You need to build a life that allows your true self to flourish rather than forcing you to hide. This isn't about becoming more normal, it's about becoming more yourself. It's about understanding that your psychological gifts come with responsibilities. You're not just here to experience reality differently, you're here to help others expand their own consciousness. The world needs your unique perspective. It needs your emotional depth, your pattern recognition, your ability to see through facades and understand complex systems. It needs your transformational presence and your capacity to hold paradox and complexity. If you're ready to fully embrace your psychological uniqueness and learn how to express it authentically in the world, make sure you're subscribed because my next video will reveal the exact steps to transform your uniqueness from a source of isolation into a source of power and connection. You've spent enough time trying to fit in. It's time to stand out. It's time to be who you were always meant to be. Your psychological uniqueness isn't just a part of who you are, it's the most important part. And the world is waiting for you to finally embrace it. The next video in this series will show you exactly how to develop these traits further and use them to create the life you were meant to live. Don't miss it, because once you understand how to harness your psychological uniqueness, everything changes.